So, you hit level 60. You spend all that time on quests and dungeons to hit the level cap, so what is there left to do? Well, there are still plenty of quests to help you learn more about the world, and your earned experience is converted to money, so the things you couldn't buy earlier are in reach. Many holidays exist within the game, like Winter's Veil, Children's Week, and so on. They give special items and extra income. But then what? Well, you need to make the leap from dungeons and quests to raids. Raid dungeons tend to require far larger groups, between 10 to even 40 players. And they also require a lot of coordination between them, and this is where joining a guild can be really helpful. Nowadays, it's easy to get together and form calls with people, but try managing a whole 40-man raid with or without calls back then. But before you enter said raid, you must fine-tune your understanding of the class system and optimize accordingly. And you have to decide if you want to sink points into skills related to tanking, DPS, or healing. For hunters like me, we have to decide between making our pets as dangerous as us, or just putting all of the damage on ourselves. If not DPS, there are crowd control abilities like Frost and Freezing Traps. They can either slow down or freeze enemies, and those effects are very useful in wearing down enemies or alleviating the mana pool for healers. Of course, other classes have their own form of crowd control, from sapping to banishment spells, and the classic Mage Sheep spell. Some abilities can only be learned from rarer books, only available as dungeon drops or as objects sold in the auction house. It's from this point on that you need to do these endgame dungeons to get the gear and abilities you need, since survivability and damage output are things you have to get right. Tanks focus on stamina and strength stats, healers will focus on intellect and spirit, DPS can prioritize plenty of stats, though hunters put points in agility to increase firing accuracy. Since enemies are 1 or 2 levels higher than us at all times, we need to make every shot count. Lastly, it's about finding the best gear to wear for these raids. Whether they give passive bonuses or active effects, it's better to get those with set bonuses too. The Dire Maul dungeon can help with finding gear that synergize with one another. Once part of the Highborn Empire, it's now a hunt for demons, as well as Highborn remnants. One wing is full of ogres, and it's not easy, but if you win there, you can become king of the ogres! At least until you leave the dungeon, of course. The Dire Maul also has a questline for warlocks to help get their epic summon mount, so that's one reason to come here if you're one of those. For paladins, getting their epic mount requires a visit to Scholomance, a necromancer academy founded by a powerful wizard of the Scourge named Kel'Thuzad. Many dark experiments are held there, including an attempt to create plague dragons. It's a very hard dungeon for a normal 5-man group, so it's one of the few dungeons to allow raid groups up to 10. Another one of my favorites from the classic era is Stratholme, which was where Prince Arthas Menethil massacred his own subjects to prevent their conversion into undead. This place is huge, and it's divided up between the living side and the undead side. The former is filled with more Scarlet Crusade members holed up in this one cathedral. One of their leaders is there, and when you encounter him, he turns out to be a demon named Balnazar. He was around to see the fall of Lordaeron, and was supposedly killed, but nope, he was controlling the Scarlet Crusade the whole time. The other side of Stratholme has you racing against the clock to save a hostage from a Death Knight, who can drop a rare undead horse mount. It's one of the few mounts at this point that everyone can ride, regardless of race and faction. The rest of the dungeons can be found in Blackrock Mountain. Blackrock Spire is divided into upper and lower parts, and you have to go through the former to enter the latter. But of course, the real reason why the lower is so memorable, the upper portion is so memorable, is due to this guy.
Alright, thumbs up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Dragon! Oh my god, he just ran in.
But none of these dungeons compare to the massive beast that is Blackrock Depths. It is huge. Even now it's considered the largest dungeon in the game, and you need to be at least level 47 to enter. There are tons of bosses to fight, lots of quests to do, and loads of gear to collect. There's even a Dark Iron Forge, the only place to smelt dark iron ore that some gear need. So more reason to come here. And if that isn't enough, it also sells blacksmithing recipes, though you need to build up enough of a reputation to access them. It's a never-ending cycle, but that's par for the course nowadays with the structure of mobile games. Not that it's healthy, but you know. So let's say you're confident enough to start raiding. To begin, you need to know about certain shortcuts and attunements that make it easier to get inside those raids. The Molten Core may be found inside Blackrock Depths, but one quest gives away a secret entrance that can get you inside. And you'll know this because a quest giver will be nearby to warp you in. A shortcut to Blackwing Lair can be found by finishing a quest to kill a boss in the upper Blackrock Spire. Then touch this orb on the other side of the hallway and boom, you're in the dungeon. Naxxramas? While there's an unused instance portal in Stratholme, the actual entrance is found somewhere outside, and you can pay your way to gain access to it. Or you can unlock it for free if you're exalted with the Argent Dawn. But one truly epic attunement quest comes from doing Onyxia's Lair. There's this man named Windsor who saw that Lady Katrana Prestor, who you see next to Anduin in Stormwind, was responsible for the disappearance of King Varian. He lost all hope in exposing her when he loses his evidence, but after you free him, it's an epic march to the throne room. This is where we learn of Katrana's real name, Onyxia, and you try to fight off her dragons alongside another hero, Bolvar Vordragon. And by fight, I mean I let Bolvar do all the work while I hide. Sadly, Windsor dies from all this, but after a few more quests, you get an amulet that can take you to a cave to fight Onyxia again. With the possible help of 39 more friends, of course. Whew. Now then, let's take the time to go over these raids in as much detail as possible. First up is the Molten Core. Lots of giant fire elementals and core hounds, and your goal is to defeat each of the bosses so you can douse these runes, which you can only do by using special items obtained in Ashara. Yeah, that zone is not exactly as empty as I made it out to be, but even then, that's about the only reason you'll need to go there. The bosses are a true test of everything you've learned from your time playing this game. You will need to be able to adapt and react on the fly, even before you fight a boss. One of them, Magmadar, has all of these small corehound packs, and each pack you have to get rid of at roughly the same time. Otherwise, they'll revive each other. The boss itself is no slouch either, as it can fear the group, spit AoE fire, and get itself into a frenzy to speed up its attacks. As a hunter, I could dispel that attack speed steroid with an ability, but I have to learn that ability through a book. Other notable bosses include Baron Geddon and Gar. Both drop half of what is called the Bindings of the Windseeker, one of the first legendary rarity items you can find. There are more legendary items since, but back then they live up to their rarity. The questline you do leads to getting one called Thunder Fury, Blessed Blade of the Windseeker. This was a great weapon for tanks and anyone needing AoE damage on melee hits, and it looked cool as f***. Geddon also dropped another legendary item called the Talisman of Binding Shard. It was originally a beta item not meant for players, but the developers let the one player who got it keep it. So after more fights and dousing all the runes, a new boss shows up called Majordomo Executus. You defeat him by fighting all of his minions, and when you got them all, he surrenders. He agrees to summon Ragnaros for you, since if you're truly foolish to come down here to face him, you'll feel his wrath. Dude, it's 3 in the afternoon. Get the hell up. There are 3 phases to this fight. Phase 1 is about getting him down as fast as possible within 3 minutes before he submerges into the lava and brings out his children for Phase 2. You're gonna want to beat them before he returns, since Phase 3 is a repeat of 1. Although at that point, you either kill him now or die to his children again. Hell, the first phase alone can be tough because of all those launching explosions, so watch your positioning, without stopping your attacks against him. That's the kind of tightrope you walk from here on out. Even with a full group, beating these bosses the first time is a matter of trial and error. You'll find tactics that work, but not everyone can react in time and may lack the gear to survive. Even with guilds, you'll need a lot of patience and perseverance. Only then will the triumphs feel rewarding. Bosses drop multiple loot items with epic rarity, and since they're almost always going to be useful, you'll find yourself back in the dungeon at some point, and when you are strong enough to defeat the last boss and clear the whole dungeon, you get that sense of true accomplishment. Now, Onyxia's lair only has her as a boss, but she has Fire Breath, Tail Swipe, Fear, and a cluster of eggs that hatch the moment you step near them. Once she takes to the air, she will breathe fire on you in set patterns, and you have to get her closer to Earth to finish things. It's the sort of scenario that can snowball out of hand where one fallen teammate out of 40 can make the next one easier to lose, which makes the next one die faster, so on and so on. But it's worth it just to take her down and parade her head around in Stormwind. I mean it, you take her head as a quest item, turn it into someone in Stormwind, or Orgrimmar, and they'll display it for everyone to see. We all get a nice buff effect too. Next up is Blackwing Lair. We see a huge spike in difficulty from its very first boss, since you have to control him to destroy all the eggs in the room before you can actually fight him. Orcs are also streaming into the room, and if they kill the boss, it's game over. After that, there's a red dragon? Yeah, Valistraz is someone you meet in Blackrock Spire that helps you get into the upper areas and then some. He worked closely with Alexstrasza, leader of his Dragonflight, but he was captured by the big bad of this raid and is being corrupted into serving him. Before he does, he buffs you with a 3-minute regen stat to try and kill him. You'll need it, even though he starts at a 20% health, because he can make players explode and die. The third boss requires you to go through a suppression chamber full of dragon whelps that slow your movement and attacks. You need rogues to shut the machines off and make getting up easier. And if you die to the boss, you have to start all over again. After that, we have a few bosses that inflict a dangerous burn over time that can only be mitigated with a special cloak you get through another questline. This is especially true for the final boss, Nefarian, a bastard beyond belief. You see him in Upper Blackrock Spire, and he does nothing but taunt and insult you since he is so smug for being a child to Deathwing. I hate him and his stupid face. Anyway, he's here to create the perfect dragonflight that can absorb any elemental attack. The fight against him is incredibly tough since you have to kill his hordes of Drake guards before facing his dragon form. And while he might seem no different from Onyxia, he has the most bullcrap ability ever. He will inflict a call effect on a random class that will cause everyone of that class to suffer in many ways. But hunters have it worse, because if they get hit, their ranged weapons break. It's possible to avoid it by switching to an inferior weapon before that call, but it's still a steep cost to bear both in battle and in repairing it afterwards. So, more reason to kill him, cut off his head, and display it to everyone around me. Next up is Zul'Gurub. This one has no attunement required and can be done with 20 people instead of 20. It's a massive troll-themed dungeon that I only remember for 2 reasons. First, there are a few rare mounts that drop from the priests that turn into their respective lowest spirit. Since trolls worship animal spirits, they get much more out of that in the form of their abilities. The other noteworthy thing is the main boss itself, Hakar the Soul Flayer. He's someone you would hear in passing during your travels from the hinterlands to the Sunken Temple. And it turns out he's here because someone summoned him. His fight requires you to be infected with corrupted blood, which hurts him whenever he lands a life-draining attack on you. But getting that sort of blood means running into a rather infamous epidemic within the game. that thing can be spread to other players, and it doesn't stay in the dungeon, so catching it in a city is very possible. Players, and maybe some NPCs, would be infected, and the survival rate for that plague is low. That means you can enter cities that have been littered with skeletons of the revived dead. It was certainly a sight to behold, and it inspired other events down the line. But enough of that, let's talk about outdoor raids. These include the Dragons of Nightmare, who spawn in front of one of the 4 great trees that house a gate to the Emerald Dream. Each dragon gives a debuff when you die, which is meant to prevent people from rushing in after they revive themselves. Hell, one of them even puts the team to sleep for 2 minutes if you get hit by one of his abilities. 2 other bosses before them were a Zul'Gurub, a blue dragon who hung around in Ashara, and Lord Kazak, a demon in the Blasted Lands. Now, let me tell you about one of the most legendary openings to any raid content out there. It is a storyline of legendary proportions. It starts by meeting a druid in Silithus. He's trying to look for a bronze dragon named Ahn'Qiraj, and to gain an audience with him, you must first kill the 3rd boss in Blackwing Lair, and after that you need to kill a crap ton of Silithid and turn in their carapaces. Once you reach neutral rank with the Brood of Nozdormu, Ahn'Qiraj sends you to the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj, where you learn the history of the War of the Shifting Sands, and how the gates that were sealing the Qiraji away are weakening. The bronze dragon only has 1 shard of the scepter, but now it's up to you to find the other 3 shards. Those are in the hands of 3 other dragons from the red, green, and blue dragonflights. You also need to help the Alliance and Horde prepare for another war against the evil forces, which is done by donating various items. While that's going on, you can start 3 quest lines of varying difficulty and length. The red shard was in the hands of Valistraz, but Nefarious took it recently for the purposes of destroying it, and you now have 5 hours to defeat him before that happens. This is the easiest shard to get because it's only 1 quest. The green shard is held by Irenicus, who's still stuck in the Emerald Dream. Too bad a certain someone can't help us.
Be careful.
You'll need to visit the Sunken Temple and meet Malfurion Stormrage, who tells you to gather nightmare fragments around the emerald portals near the Great Trees. Afterwards, you go to Moonglade, where you fight Irenicus to free him from the corruption and take his shard. But now comes arguably the longest quest chain. The search for the blue shard begins with learning from a Zul'Gurub that he lost it to a small minnow. Given what he is, you learn that he lost it to a shark. You have to go through the trouble of building an Arcanite buoy with this one gnome, and that requires items from raids and crafting. You're gonna have a lot of repeat raids, even more than what you'd expect from other quests. So you take the buoy, summon the shark, who's named Moz by the way, because clever. You finally have all the pieces and take it to Ahn'Qiraj, where he gives you the scepter. Now you just have to wait for the war effort you contributed to gather around the gates. And once you hit that gong, you're in a 10-hour war where players battle in Silithus until the raid enemies stop coming. They can get some neat rewards from this, but they pale in comparison to those who completed the Scepter quest during this time frame. That award is by the Gong, a black Qiraji resonating crystal that summons a black Qiraji battle tank as a legendary mount. It's never found elsewhere to this day, and it is a worthy prize for all the work you have done to this point. While similar cross-faction events would play out, I don't think they would ever reach the sort of epic quality and feeling that this one provided. Oh well, nowhere to go but down now with 2 more raid dungeons, the Ruins and the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj. With 20 players, you face more Qiraji forces in the Ruins, which ends with a fight against Osirian the Unscarred. He was originally an Anubisoth, which were Titan-forged giants that were repurposed for the old gods, so you have to lure this guy towards these crystals so you can weaken him and deal damage. It's a matter of kiting around and making sure he's always weakened so your party can hurt him. Not much I can say since I didn't face him in this manner. Now, for the Temple, it's another 40-man raid that was far more difficult than anything so far. The first few bosses, like Prophet Scarum and the Silithus Royalty, are hard Molten Core tough, but the rest, harder than Blackwing Lair. The penultimate fight puts you up against the twin emperors, Vek'lor and Vek'Nilash. One brother is immune to physical attacks, the other to magic. And they both teleport and can make the many bugs in the room grow big and strong. The only saving grace is that they share HP, so it doesn't matter where your attacks hit. But now it's time to talk about C'Thun. He's the first old god you get to fight, and for the time he was considered impossible due to the amount of damage he caused. It took a patch to nerf him, although his original version is back for the Season of Mastery events in the classic servers. Well, when they used to run them. Still, to think that a giant eyeball would be so menacing, only to turn into this. Knowing my battles from Burning Crusade, I probably would have had a similar experience when it came to fighting big bad guys like him, and finding satisfaction in taking him down after weeks of effort. Now it is time to talk about the last raid introduced in the vanilla era, Naxxramas. This is a huge necropolis that floats above the Eastern Plaguelands. It has 15 bosses scattered through 5 wings, and has some of the nastiest looking scourge enemies yet. The Abomination Wing welcomes you with a humongous flesh abomination. It's a geared check for raiders since he only hits players with higher health than others, even if they aren't tanks. Grobulus seemingly has no face, just a big old tube in front, full of green slime and poison. He floods the room with poison gas that slowly creeps and never goes away, so you have to keep it as far away from the group as possible and hope you beat him in time. Gloof is a hideous beast who can summon corpses that he can eat to recover health. Obviously, you have to kill those so that doesn't happen. Crowd control is your friend here. Finally, there's Thaddeus, who's probably my favorite fight in this place because he charges you with either a positive or negative charge debuff, so you have to group up with others of the same debuff to deal more damage to him. Otherwise, you take damage while grouped with opposing elements. This requires a lot of moving back and forth, but it's very doable and makes for good practice on raid awareness. I don't have much to say on the Plague and Spider Wing bosses, but not so for the Death Knight Wing. Instructor Vesuvius has you using his own students against him, since his abilities can decimate a normal tank. So it becomes a management project on keeping enemy NPCs alive. Gothic the Harvester has a living and undead side where any living enemies killed get sent to the other side to be killed again. And you keep this up until the boss decides to come down and play. Finally, we have the 4 Horsemen, former paladins that have become Death Knights. One of them, High Lord Morgraine, has the Ashbringer, a legendary weapon that was originally made to slay evil. You can get a copy of it, called the Corrupt Ashbringer, though its side effects only become obvious in the Scarlet Monastery Cathedral. As for the fight itself, it's about killing each horseman one at a time while ensuring the party is split up well enough that they don't take a lot of damage. But you can't stay on one horseman the whole time, gotta go to another when you can. Finally, we can enter the upper wing of the dungeon and face the last 2 bosses. First up is Sapphiron, a frostworm with a killer entrance. This is a fight that requires you having tons of frost resistance gear. If you have that, you'll have a chance against some of its frost abilities. And when you get past him, you face the final boss of the vanilla era, Kel'Thuzad. Once a member of the Mages of Dalaran, he's now in service of the Lich King and was responsible for spreading the plague through Lordaeron. Your party needs to have a high amount of DPS and execution to ensure success. The first phase is about pushing back minions before they overwhelm you. After that, Kel'Thuzad enters the fray with the ability to mind control, drop fissures, blast things with ice. It's a handful. Once he gets to 40% health, he'll summon some guards to help him. They cannot be killed, so you're left to either CC them or avoid them as your party makes the final push. And to think, prior to all this, raid fights were merely a step up from regular dungeons. Now, it's like these raid fights are on a different level from past ones. But that's part of the appeal. The continuing challenge that rewards you with stronger gear that can be shown off or used to help others get that same gear. They also carry over to other raids, and now it's a matter of beating them in as little time as possible. Whole communities were made with this game that keep track of what guild killed what, how they did it, and how you could do it too if you tried. It was the first time I experienced such a thing, and helped me get a better understanding of the gameplay. With that said, if there's anything that I can say about the vanilla era's content, from what little I've experienced, it was a hard era to get through compared to the expansions that followed. But I suppose, in a way, it makes it more rewarding to those who stuck around. There's enough variety that you can get your money's worth, and for a large game like this, that's a big deal. There are more ways to play, and more ways to experience the world of Warcraft. Now, let's wind down this era by talking a little bit about stuff that either wouldn't be resolved until a later expansion, or not at all. You know that strange portal that's in the Stormwind canals? That was supposedly meant to take Alliance players to their map for player housing. It's an old feature that has had models hidden away and never used. We wouldn't get something like this until Warlords of Draenor with its garrison system. Also in Stormwind, there's the Stormwind Vault. In lore, it's said that it has the world's most dangerous criminals inside. Supposedly there is map data and a loading screen that shows it having a similar build to the stockades. But I say supposedly because I can't really confirm if this is real or if this was made for private servers. Gilneas is one of those regions that we know from lore, as the nation sealed itself off during one war and now only has this massive gate to show for it. But if you were to somehow peek over it, you just find empty land in the space where it should be. And it doesn't quite match the size that the world map has it out to be. There's also Quel'Thalas, which exists north of Lordaeron, but you can't get to it because of a landslide. If you want, you can swim around the northern eastern kingdoms to get there, but all you find is a Night Elf tower. Seems out of place since Quel'Thalas was High Elf territory. The Caverns of Time are closed off in this era, but you can clip inside and find an early build of it. On a similar front, we have Mount Hyjal, this tall-ass mountain you can't see inside of, except through a small gated window in Winterspring, hidden deep within Dark Whisper Gorge. Abusing the level geometry may get you inside, and if the instant warps don't get you, then you at least get to see this amazing looking zone. For the longest time, this zone, which appeared close to completion, was the subject of speculation and mystery. The main entrance has a blocked off instance portal, so perhaps this was going to be a raid dungeon like Zul'Gurub, where it was outdoor based. Yet on top of its huge size, there's a cave that looks exactly like Onyxia's lair. What would be inside it if it were part of a raid? Also at the end of the zone is the world tree Nordrassil, which was what Archimonde wanted to destroy during the Third War. His corpse still hangs on that tree, and it's a shame no one can see it because it looks pretty cool. It's been around since the game's release, so why didn't they do anything with it after all this time? Speaking of, Deadwind Pass has a similar problem Azshara had, where it had endgame level enemies, but nothing to really do. There's Karazhan, the mythical mage tower of Guardian Midiv, but you can't go inside despite instance portals existing. Just behind the tower is the Forgotten Crypt. It's blocked off, but if you got past the gates, you can enter what looks to be a fully done micro-dungeon. And a creepy one too. One of the scariest rooms in this place contains the upside-down sinners, who float underwater. Supposedly, they couldn't open this place without raising the rating to M, but it's not outright deleted either, and since players could theoretically access it, wouldn't they just rate it M anyway? One last thing is the Emerald Dream, which I mentioned a few times. While having various maps and unique assets, it was inaccessible due to a change in game design. Originally, this place was where you would go when you die, meet other dead players, get quests, and so on. But because the Veil is there to do all that, it'll be a while until the Emerald Dream sees the light of day. With that, it's time we put a close on the vanilla era. Tune in next time when we make our way over to a whole new world outside of Azeroth, in the Outlands.